So tell me a little bit about like how you got started with Chicken Soup for the Soul. I know that's like kind of what people associate with you with, at least originally. Uh, Been around so long. Love the series. I think my grandmother wrote a chapter for one of the books.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What's her name?
Louise Lawrence. It was like, I think it was Chicken Soup for Seniors.
Okay.
Um, Something like that. Yeah. I remember she gifted me a copy of the book and I have it on one of the bookshelves around here somewhere, but she was so proud of it. It was a great accomplishment for her.
That's so funny. My best friend, her stepmother submitted a story before I knew her.
Really?
For the, I don't know, Working Mom Soul or something. It was a book that I did. So it's pretty funny. It's small world.
Yes, definitely.
So I actually started with Jack before Chicken happened. So I met him in, I think like 1989. And we didn't really think about the book series until probably, I don't know, 90 or so, and it got published in 93. So that was kind of the beginning. But it was one of those things where he just came back to the office and said, "Hey, I think we're supposed to put all these stories in a book." And I always tell people I'm so glad I was 24, 25, or 20, however old I was at the time, where I didn't have an opinion. Because they'd probably be like, "Well, that's a stupid idea." so so we put stories in a book for a couple of years, and then finally got published in 93 after being turned down by everybody under the sun. I don't know if you read that, but we didn't realize you had to have an agent to get a
Mm.
book published. And so we went, we sent it out to every agent and everyone said, no, America doesn't want nicey nice, they love blood and guts. And, that's, so we're, but we tell these stories from stage. I'm pretty sure they're going to work, because Jack had been testing them out, Mark had been testing them out. And we went out and asked everybody from Zig Ziglar to Brian Tracy to Les Brown to all the different people, what's your best story as well. So we kind of knew that it would work. And so finally, after we got 100 and something no's, we just thought, well, let's just go to Book Expo and just pass out manuscripts. And the funny thing is that Jack said, well, I think I know one guy that does like recovery stuff, and maybe we can park our stuff in his booth. And so I'm just unloading manuscripts. They're walking the floor. And at the end of the third day, they still got all no's.
Wow.
People looked at them like, you have to have an agent, idiot, And so they went, Jack was leaving, actually, it was in the parking lot. And Peter Vegso that owned Health Communications walked up to him and said, hey, Jack, if you want, I'll look at your book. Maybe I can publish it. And Jack said, well, only if you really like it. And so he took it to the airport, and about 2 hours later, he called the office. He's like, I love this book. I want to publish it. And I always say, I never knew that story until, I would say like 5 or 6 years ago. We did a documentary called The Soul of Success. And so we flew to Boca to interview Peter Vegso. And he told that story. I'm like, that's so weird. I never knew that. And how often do we ignore like what's in our own backyard and look outside? Like the grass is always greener somewhere else. And it turned out it was the best thing that ever happened to us because it was a small publishing house. And they were able to, they owned their own print presses, they owned everything, they owned all the distribution. So we were easily able to go from 0 to 500,000 copies in a month or whatever it was, or I think at one point it might have been a week. And any other publisher could never have done that. They couldn't have delivered. And they were also, he was easy. I could cry and get it. I want to do this. And he's like, okay, do whatever you want. Don't cry, don't cry. So it's very different than any normal traditional publishing house, which allowed us as entrepreneurs to also work with him, who was a major entrepreneur who was always willing to take a risk. And so together we spent the next 18 years building 230 titles and 500 million books in print, something like that. So
yeah, I'm sure he would say it was the best thing that happened to him too.
I think so. I think some people say, don't you wish you had self-published? I'm like, are you kidding? We could barely get along, let alone self-publish. And we didn't have any money. So we could never have afforded to print anything. So I think the first year and a half after we published the first book, I would literally order books and sell them in the back of the room and just pay our overhead and not pay him. So we didn't see a royalty check for about, 18 months or so. It went from about 0 to $1 million because it just kind of got that tipping point and then it all kind of worked. So
wow, that's a great story.
Yeah.
I think that kind of tells people not to give up, right? To just, if you really believe in what you're doing, you just have to kind of keep pushing forward because it'll resonate. If it resonates that deeply with you, it'll resonate with someone else as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we believed in it so much. And it was right when the Gulf War hit, that first one, and we hadn't seen a war since Vietnam. So, people started canceling flights and not hiring speakers. And so it was a really hard time. And it was a recession and everything else. And of course, right after we got published, I found out I was pregnant with my first child. So then I had to go to work like, I have some news. I'm pregnant. He's freaking out, thinking he's going to think it's a bad thing. And that's great news. I'm like, really? So then I had to figure out, all right, how do I raise a child and build a business and have a very traditional husband who's like, well, you're going to stay home now, aren't you? Not a chance. I'm a control freak. I've been working on this for 6 years, starving to death. There's no way I'm staying home. So we just made it work, and it was fun. It was a wild ride, to say the least.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'm sure through the process you learned a ton. I mean, being that young when it started and really seeing something from the ground up. I mean, I'm sure that was like the best incubator for business growth ever for you.
It was crazy. And when I first took the job with Jack, my dad had said, you can't, he's like, what are you doing? I sent you to business school and you're going to go work for a hippie. And I remember I said, Dad, the hippie went to Harvard. Worst case, I'll get an extra Harvard education for free. And little did I know it would be like the best MBA on the planet. So
I imagine.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, do you think it would have been different for you at that time if you had had like female mentors, or do you think that the leadership that was shown and the learning opportunities would have been the same?
I think if I had female leadership, it would have been very helpful. I had a little bit of that, but not much. And I think they put me in a position to pretty much create my own destiny at some level, but I didn't really have anybody there to say, I'm giving you permission to go ask for this or do that, or, kind of like own what you've created. So I always kind of thought of it as, oh, it's Jack, it's not me. And even my own books, the first book I did, I wrote Chicken Soup for the Surviving Soul because my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And, I still kind of didn't own that. Then I did Christian Soul because I realized people that were surviving had more faith than others. And then from there, I went on to do Working Moms or Women or something, just kind of followed my house.
Sorry.
I have 3 of those running around right now.
Yeah, sorry. That's remote working life, right?
No, I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think it would have made a big difference. And I think I was really lucky because my youngest sister came to work for me when she was studying for her nursing, her state boards in California. And she said, we should do this book. And I said to her, well, why would they ever let us do a book? We work here. And she said, Patty, you started before it even started. I mean, if anybody deserves a book, it's you. You're dealing with all these crazy authors and having to handle all the day-to-day operations and everything else under the sun. I mean, if not you, who? And so I very nervously went into that boardroom and said, we want to write a book. And they looked at each other, he and Mark, and said, fine. And I always say to women, like, how many of us take ourselves out of the game before the coach even puts us on the field?
Yeah, that is definitely a topic I wanted to talk to you about because I know you'll have insight on that. And it's something we recently wrote an article about it too. We have, as women, I don't see this as much with men. I was in a very male dominated industry for most of my career before I started this publication. And I don't see it in my male colleagues, this habit of upper limiting where we really put our own ceiling on ourselves. We used to talk about the glass ceiling, but now it seems almost like self-imposed. And I don't know why that is. But I see it a lot.
Well, I know there's a ton of data and research that shows that that's true, and that a lot of my friends that are still in corporate and they're in tech and different areas are learning that women in their mid-30s kind of take themselves out of the game. And the men and women are coming in pretty equal at this point out of college. And then women don't delegate as well. They tell themselves stories that if they don't do it all, they're not good enough. They have to act like they have it all together no matter what. We talk a lot more than men, so we talk out our stuff out loud. I think there's a lot of reasons for it, but I think it's time for it to come to an end. I think with I love your publication, what you're doing. I think it really gives women a voice and allows them, with Chicken Soup, it was that way. It was like you got to read people's lives through their own eyes. And so there was no how-to. It was just motivation and inspiration, and it gave you the inspiration and motivation to kind of take action. And I think that's what's been missing for women, is for people to say, no, you are worthy. And I honestly wouldn't have started permission granted if it wasn't for my mom, diagnosed, 15 years later or whatever it was. And she said, I did not raise a daughter to be invisible. You have to promise me no matter what, you will take credit. And so it's like, oh
It
God.
seems hard to do. And I don't, I don't see men apologizing for it or feeling that same being pulled in all directions, especially when you're a mom.
Yeah.
I mean, I see dads at work, having no problem saying, I got to leave early. My kid has a soccer game today, and not apologizing for it or trying to make up a different reason that sounds less like an issue. And I don't know if that's been decades of, kind of imposed on us, or if we're creating that dynamic ourselves. But I agree, it really needs to stop.
It does. I remember the first time I ever took a day, because we live in the same neighborhood. And my sons go to school. They did go to school in the same neighborhood. And my youngest was having a beach day. And I had just gone to strategic coach with Dan Sullivan. And he was teaching us about how to have free days. And he asked in the room, how many of you have, one free day, 30, 90, 120. And all these men are raising their hands like they have half the year off, mostly financial planners and stuff like that. And I'm in there going, what the hell is a free day? I had no clue. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to take my son to his beach day. And I did. I'll never forget. He fell in this puddle, and he was really little. He might have been preschool. And he got up and he's like, Mommy, I saved myself all by myself. Cause he was like, flat in the water and
Yeah.
the ocean was this puddle. And I thought, okay, I could have easily missed this. And I did miss a lot, but I also put in place a lot of people to help me. I had a nanny who was amazing. But it was hard. And then I just started to do a little bit more of it and a little bit more of it. And I really felt like a fish out of water. I mean, I remember going to McDonald's with my son and literally sitting in the corner by myself with my son going, what is this woman over there talking about? It's just people do outside the walls of an office, because from the day we moved to Santa Barbara, it was all hands on deck. And we just had so much on our plate with books, and it started to work. So it's like, oh, we want another one. We want another one. We want another one. So, it was insane. And I'm glad I was young, because today I would just pull the covers up and be like, screw it, I'm watching The Crown for the 15th time. I don't have it in me, But yeah, it's important. And when I finally got to the place where I started asking for more, I remember the first time I asked for a bonus, and we got $1 million check. And I walked into Jack's office and I said, so how much of that are you going to give to me? Like an idiot. And he said, well, how much do you want? I said, I don't know, $10,000. And I was a wreck. I was a total wreck. I mean, this is insane. And so he kind of laughed, and I walked out, and I had Harvey McKay's voice in my head saying, don't ever ask for something because you need it. Ask for it because you deserve it. And he said, so many people go in saying, oh, my wife or my husband or whatever just had this happen and I need a raise or whatever it is. And so I went back and I said, I have a question for you. And he's like, what? And I said, well, what would I have had to have done that I haven't done over these last 5 years to get a hell yes from you on a $10,000 bonus? And he's like, go write yourself a check. In hindsight, I could have said I want $250,000 and he would have given it to me. But he was navigating the waters just along with me. He didn't know any different. So at some point, he finally said, listen, whatever you want, you have to ask for it, because I am absolutely not a mind reader. I know you are, but I'm not. And if you ever find a man that's a mind reader, send him my way. I'll study him from head to toe. I will memorize everything about him, and you'll never have to ask for anything again. And I soon learned that was never going to happen. So I had to just use myself as my own science project. And when I would get nervous, I would think, all right, you're going to have an out-of-body experience. You're going to walk in there. You're going to have already played it out in your head of what you're going to say. If there's an obstacle or any kind of answer you don't like, what are they going to look like? And how are you going to respond? And, we teach that in the work that we've been doing for years. It's all about events happen and we respond and you get an outcome. And all I had to do was change my own responses. I just had to stop saying no to myself. I had to start asking for what I wanted. I had to start, not always plotting against myself, telling myself a bad story. Oh, it must be because of this, instead of, well, if I'm going to predict the future, I might as well make up something good. And so it's really been kind of a mind game at the same time, which is interesting because that's what we teach, mindset. And the name of our first company was Self-Esteem Seminar. So go figure, It's kind of...
I think it's hard. It's hard though. I think it's hard for people in general, but especially women, to own their accomplishments and just be unapologetic about it. And unless it's accomplishments that are tied to motherhood, those we seem to be able to, take credit for and feel good about. And with men, it tends to be, in the workplace, at least, having absolutely no problem saying that they were the one that closed the deal or they were the one that got the contractor. Yeah. It's really hard. It's hard to change that thinking.
Well, and it's interesting to watch how different people tell the stories, how they can be so differently. And I often joke with him a lot. I'm like, at some point in time, our stories are going to have to kind of cross over, because the way you remember them, the way I remember them aren't always the same. And because I was younger, I think I remember them more than you do. But he's like, well, reframe it. Tell me how you saw it. So I've just learned how to have those crucial conversations and be really honest and open about it without being a complete basket case. And I always say to women, start asking for little things. So when you have a big ask, you're not a wreck. If it's a brand new sport for you, you might throw up the first time. But if you've been asking for silly little things, I would say ask for an upgrade on the airplane, ask for an upgrade at a hotel, ask for an extra discount. And don't be attached. And so if you can have the intention without the attachment, then you can kind of watch like how it goes. Like, oh, it's interesting. And then you can think about it from a more sane way than letting your thoughts run off and then, not wanting to ever ask for anything again, which I think we do a lot of too. It's like we take that big scary step and then we retreat, and then we wait a long time before we do it again.
Yeah.
So I think the repetition is really important to keep on keeping yourself uncomfortable and knowing that you're doing it for all the right reasons.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about, if you put me on a basketball court and gave me a basketball and told me to, shoot the ball and make a basket, probably no, it wouldn't happen. But if you gave me 100 tries, I would probably get one in. So it is a numbers game with things like that. And everything is practice, and everything is, like you said, repetition. I mean, I know the million times a day I'm faced with things that make me uncomfortable or nervous. Whether it's being a boss or, pitching ideas, pitching sponsorships or anything. And I always try to take everything out to the worst case scenario and say, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen if they, what could they possibly say? What would be the worst? And I get myself comfortable there. And then anything less than that feels like a win because I'm prepared for that worst case.
I say the same thing. What's the minimum number I can have? What's the target? What's the outrageous? And then if I could just figure out the minimum or whatever the train wreck might look like, and then I ask myself, can I live with it? And then I focus on what I actually want, because we get what we think about. And so I think so often we think about what we don't want to have happen. And there is such a thing as law of attraction, I mean, The Secret did as well as it did because I think part of it, we know quantum physics is real. And I think all that was so new too. I didn't know anything about even thinking that way when I started. So I was kind of, ignorance was bliss, I guess. But yeah, I would have asked for a lot more. It would have been different, very different. And yet I'm grateful for what I did experience, because it was worth a lifetime. I mean, it was working with hundreds and hundreds of authors and different PR companies and publishing, and I was sort of the mediary of all the bad things and all the issues. I could pretty much handle any situation. So it's given me a lot of tools that I don't think I had then that I have now. So I'm pretty comfortable being very uncomfortable and not knowing.
That's an amazing skill. I think everyone can benefit from that.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what you're trying to share with everybody and pass that along, because not everyone has had that benefit of the experience that you had. And yeah.
Well, and even on my phone, I have a little thing from one of my authors, Ellie Sheffy, that says perfectly imperfect. And I always remind myself, we're not perfect. We're total humans. We're going to mess up. And I even ask my kids at this point that are 23 and 27 now, like, is there anything that you wish I had done differently? And they're like, Mom, anybody could take us to practice, but nobody could show us how to live our passion, our purpose the way that you did. And I would go to the games. I mean, I made a huge deal on a soccer field and came back to the office like, hey, we're going to do this infomercial that's funded for $1 million. And Jack's looked at me like, I guess I'll never be upset that you go to one of your kids' soccer games again. I said, I'm always working because I love what I do. So, and that's the other thing too. If you don't share your vision and your message with everyone, then it's kind of a hard road to hoe. And when I think back to those early days when we were at that book show, I mean, that was the only person we really knew, and we could have shared our vision first there. And then if they couldn't help us, they could say, well, you might want to know this person, or you might want to know that person. And so it's not always who you know, but it's, it's not always what you know, it's who you know, I say. And then my friend Ivan Meisner that's found BNI says, and it's how well you know them. So how are your relationships, and how much attention do you put on those relationships? Because they're as there's valuable as money, there's valuable as a deal, and I think women, our relationship skills are by far above and beyond men. And so it's like, know what you're good at and do it really well, and don't compare. I mean, if I compared myself to Jack Canfield, the Harvard genius, I'm out. I mean, I'm never going to win him in a game of Jeopardy. It's not happening. But if it comes to solving a problem or creating a connection, then that's where it was a good partnership. But other than that, I mean, I just would have asked for a lot more, for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like all the work that you're talking about, there was definitely, you deserved it.
And I did, and again, I did really, really well. I'm, and I could have asked for more, and I would have gotten a yes. And, but I didn't. So now my mission on this planet is to make sure that women give themselves permission to live their best life, whether it's to overcome a fear, or to let go of a resentment, or just to forgive themselves, or reframe your stories. It's like, I always say to my clients, give me the facts, not your story. What are the facts? And then what is your story around those facts? And does that story make you feel good? And typically they say no. So let's reframe your story based on the facts in a positive fashion to create an outcome that you want to have and be, and you want to feel. Because so much of it is a feeling based. And I think that's where our feelings get in the way of being, I don't know, just not as good, or our fears get in the way. And I think men just kind of, I don't know if they just forge through it or they just fake it. I'm not sure. Because I think there's fear too.
I see that imposter syndrome a lot with women, and I had it for a while too. And I was thinking that, everyone can look at me and tell that I don't belong here, or that I'm not at the same level, or that they're going to ask me a question I won't know the answer to, or something like that. And a part of that just comes with time and confidence. I understand, but I think women have that issue a lot more than men do. And once we figure out that, like, literally nobody knows what they're doing, they just fake it until they know.
Yeah. Fake it till you make it. That was one of our main principles all the years. Mark Victor Hansen used to say to me, kid, just get out there and fake it till you make it. I mean, I would go to swap meets to sell books. Nobody bought books at a swap meet. It was crazy. But I had really lived all the things that people talk about. And so I had to go back and be like, okay, wait a second. I've actually put this stuff into action in my own life on huge levels. So I am qualified to talk about it. And I'm not just the Valley girl that went to San Diego State that had big hair and long red nails, which I did have when I met Jack. And he's like, there's no way you can type. I'm like, yes, I can. And I could. So, it's kind of sad, but I think now that there's so many more voices out there that aren't, it's not like passive aggressive voices. It's much more empowering. And I think when I first thought about doing Permission Granted, I was in the phase of being very passive aggressive. Like, I kept waiting for other people to give me permission. Finally, I'm like, what am I waiting for? It's never going to happen. And again, so it was just slow and steady. It was a slow build. I wish we could just crown these young women in college, like, you were good enough, but it just doesn't work that way. If we don't take action and survive risks, we don't know that we can. It's just like kids.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So how do you find the writers for a book like Permission Granted? I mean, where do you find the women with the stories that fit with, the narrative that you're trying to tell?
Say I'm looking for, nonfiction stories are anywhere from 200 words to 2,500 words, and the following categories of giving yourself permission to forgive yourself, to take action, to believe it's possible. And I kind of give a little summary of each of those, and then I just put it out to my list. And then I also called a couple of my friends, like Lisa Nichols and Ayan Levinsant and Marcy Shimoff and who else? Janet Atwood. So I said, hey, would you mind sharing your story as well? Because I need extra credibility. So a lot of people wanted to be in a book with them as well. So it made it pretty easy. But it was really a fun project. It was really fun.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I mean, I've met so many people with amazing stories. I think everybody has a story if you ask the right questions, because, you know, we've all been through kind of different experiences and we can learn from each other. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, now when I was coming up in the world, we didn't have social media or things like that. And now there are all these motivational accounts that share, you know, stories or perspectives that might be different from our own, and help us kind of grow as a person. That's kind of how I think of at least the Chicken Soup series at that time, was like a connection we were making with other people that, I mean, now it seems like an everyday thing because we have social media. Like, of course, we have stories and connections with people around the world, but it wasn't that way in the early 90s at all.
No, you could just ask my mailman. He's
Yeah.
like, you guys please move downstairs. No, it was tough. I mean, and we probably, I mean, I bet I got 10,000 stories for Christian Soul, and it was insane. And finally, at some point, we went, all right, who are the ideal co-authors that can be out there marching and sharing the message? Who can they edit stories, and can they speak on the topics? And so when we started doing pet lovers and women's and different things like that, we started to target who was that co-author going to be, which made so much more sense. So we started to strategically look at, again, do we have to do it all? And the answer is absolutely not. And so how do we scale a message and create an army? And that's kind of what we did. And then we got a little smarter. We went out and said, well, what if we went out to Writer's Digest and different publications where writers look for, because they want to make $200 or whatever it is to share their story. And so we started soliciting to not just the everyday people, but also, well, everyday people, but they were professional writers. And so it made it a lot easier at some point to narrow that down from 10,000 to maybe 1,000. And then it was just a fluke. In the back of the first book, there was an empty page, and my publisher called and said, well, do you want to put something there? And I was like, I don't know. I was so over it, I didn't care. And because we worked on it for 3.5 years, we didn't want to edit one more story. And Jack said, well, why don't we say if you have a story, share it with us? And that was the beginning of a firestorm. And I'm really glad, Kelly, that there was no social media back then, because I wouldn't have survived. It's like, it was bad enough having mail and a fax machine, you know?
Yeah.
God, if I had Instagram and Facebook and Pinterest and everything else, I would have died.
I can imagine. I can imagine. That would have been a lot.
Yeah.
I did see that you guys you have a mastermind program, and you have a separate one for men's mastermind, right? So how do you change the advice that you give between what the advice and the program for women versus the advice and the program for men?
I really don't.
Okay.
I feel like it's a safer space. When I get a bunch of guys together, I can have that. They'll network, they'll go meet each other, they'll fly out and find each other in different cities and things. They immediately start to talk about what they have in common, which is, I find interesting. So, oh, you're in real estate, I'm in real estate. Oh, you have kids that play soccer. Oh, my kids play soccer. So they're kind of better networkers at some level, but really there's no difference. I think women prefer to be in women's groups together where they feel safe. I just finished a workshop, I don't want to say about 2 months ago, in person, which was the first time we've done it. So I have a house in Nashville also, and I did it there. And I had men and women. And it went really well. I mean, if you know how to navigate and how to create a safe space and do all those things, it's a little bit easier. But I wouldn't have brought in guys that were, I don't know, maybe I would today, because I can pretty much run a room pretty well. But in the beginning, I was really, really focused on women. But what I started to find out was, as I started to share it with an organization called the Transformational Leadership Council that I'm on the board of, I had a lot of guys that are big public figures, and they're like, but wait, what about us? We need to give ourselves permission. I'm like, really? And so it was okay. It's fun. I have one group of guys that comes back every single year, but I don't really promote a lot of that to men. So I mostly stick with the women. I think they need more help.
I think so too. I feel like men are okay with the permissions. Like, not everyone. I mean, everyone is an individual, right? But I think in general, it seems like this is an issue that women struggle with a lot more.
I think so. I think even at home, like, I have one gal who I've been working with for years, and her husband's very wealthy. And she was like, I've never had more than, I don't know, $300 in my wallet. I'm like, it's time to make it 3,000 and 30,000. One day she told me, she's like, I have $30,000 in my bank account right now. Because I mean, you have to ask your husband. I mean, I don't really ask my husband for things anymore, but I used to. Now I'm kind of like, this is how this is going to work after 30 years. But I was even creating that situation at home that I was creating at work, where my husband was still kind of the boss of me. It was really weird.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. My husband is 20 plus years older than me and was already extremely successful when we met and started dating. And we both had kids from previous marriages. So I was just really sensitive to the fact that, everything he had, he worked hard for and was his. And I think that was me being respectful of not taking advantage of the situation, but it was also over time. Now we've been together 20 years, so there was a time when he had to sit me down and tell me, look at all these things that you do for me. And this is the value that those things are worth. If you were to leave tomorrow, I would have to, how much it would cost me to replace you without even adding in the
levels.
Right. Without even adding in the emotional support and the ability to just go do my work. He's like, I'm like a racehorse and you're moving all the rocks out of my path so that I don't stumble. I mean, that's invaluable. I couldn't win the race without you. And it really kind of clicked for me at that moment that it was okay to, be a little bit more free with our finances, even though it wasn't me technically who earned, the vast majority of it. Mm-hmm. But it's hard. I think it's hard, especially like for stay-at-home moms and housewives and women who have a income gap with their spouses, which is common. I think it is kind of hard to wrap your head around. Thankfully, a lot of the issues that we're talking about today, I have daughters who are 19 and 23, and my sons are 25 and 27, but particularly with my daughters, I don't see as much of the hesitation to ask for what they want or to believe that they deserve it. Mm-hmm. And I think that new generation they feel much more equal to their partners and they don't feel as apologetic for, I'm just thankful to be in the workplace. No, they feel like, no, I deserve this spot. Like, I love that.
Yeah. Cause it's so important. I mean, there was so much for me, at least when I was, my kids were little, I had a ton of guilt because I was gone a lot. And because my husband was so traditional, I mean, he had his own issues. It had nothing to do with me. And my parents were married for 52 years. I never saw them fight. There was 4 kids in my family. My dad was never home because he was in sales and building a big company at the time. And my mom never made a big deal out of it. My husband grew up without a father. And so for him, when his mom was gone, it was like he was abandoned. And so I finally had to be, after all the work I'd done, I finally went, wait a second. This is not my story. This is your story. You have to fix your own story so you don't recreate that for our kids. And it was not a very graceful moment, I will tell you that.
I can very much relate to that. Yeah. My husband is Persian, and in that culture, it is very traditional for the wife to stay home and child rear and all of that. And he met me when we were both in the same industry and both working, and I continued to work, and I'm still working to this day. I have the blessing to work at home, but that was an adjustment for him just in his mind, that it wasn't some kind of insult to him that his partner was working, because it's partly cultural, partly generational, because he is older than me, but very traditional person. But yeah, I had a lot of that mom guilt because I had nannies for the kids because I was working so much too. And now I'm so thankful, because I think that I taught, especially my daughters, that it's okay to have both and you can balance. And that I think was a really good example that I gave them, but I had to reframe the thinking.
Yeah. I'll never forget. This is my second marriage. My first marriage, I was on the phone fighting with my ex-husband, and I was in my office, and we were in Culver City at the time. And one of my friends, Martin Root, was in town from Canada, and I was moaning and complaining about my ex. And he said to me, my dear, we teach people how to treat us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I was like, I need to write that down. So I'll never forget that statement as long as I live. I was probably 26 maybe. And I just thought, oh my gosh, that. And the other piece of advice I got from a woman, she said, what do you think is going to happen if this ever really works, this whole chicken soup thing? I said, I don't know. I guess we'll be really happy. But I knew she had some other idea. She was a lot older. And I said, what do you think? And she said, I think money makes you more of who you really are. And I went, oh, I need to write that one down too. But even today, I mean, my nanny called me over Christmas and said, it's because of you. I have this amazing job. I'm running triathlons. I'm in great shape. I didn't commit suicide. Like, I mean, at one point she was so low, and I had to just, be an example for her of what, because we can say one thing, but it's not really what you say, it's what you do.
Mhm.
And so just being that example. And I still try to do that whenever I get scared. I just think about, all right, if I was an example, how would I be? And what would it look like? And don't go do it, even if you feel like you're going to throw up or, be up all night the night before thinking about it. Do it anyway, because if you don't do it, you're going to be in the same spot the next day. And so it's, there's no downside.
Yeah, no, there's not. I think if they're as moms, if we have, whether we work or whether we have a hobby that we're passionate about or whatever it is, it's really healthy for our kids to see us as well-rounded people. And if our whole identity is just being their mom, I mean, we're going to really have a tough time when they leave home, and they're going to have a tough time too, thinking about like, how, are we okay? Like, they're away at college worrying about us, and it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have to keep our own identity, our own interest. And that, I mean, you really have to work at it, because naturally you want to pour all your energy into your child. It's normal, but you've got to try to keep a balance. It's hard.
Well, I think too, there's a lot of judgment. At least there was probably when we were working really hard. There was, where I live, at least, there's not a lot of moms at work.
No, me neither.
Like, oh, she's gone again. And then after about 15 or 20 years of them being married, they're like, can I carry your suitcases? So, you just have to deal with it. And for me, I couldn't imagine doing it any other way. I think I would have not been a very good mom if I had stayed home, because I wouldn't have been really happy. And my husband's kind of the person that moves the rocks for me. I'm like the racehorse that can't settle down. And everyone always says, you'll never quit working. I'm like, I would. And they're like, you won't. Just face it. And my son went to WashU in St. Louis. Coming from Santa Barbara, St. Louis was really a hard transition for him. And it's a very hard school. And he called me and said, Mom, I really want to transfer to USC. I said, you're not doing that. You got in there with a great referral, and you don't burn bridges. You're staying there. No questions asked, basically. And he said, Mom, you don't understand. Going to WashU, well, for you, it would be like having a cubicle job. And I said, that is a great analogy, Chandler. You're staying at WashU. So I did end up going out there a lot more, because he did struggle his freshman year. And he said, Mom, you weren't around a lot when I was in school, but now you're around all the time. He's like, I kind of like it if we had a third bedroom, but we don't. I said, well, now I can make up my own rules. I don't have to worry about whether I'm there or not, because I know I've done my job and I have an entire team that supports me. So, I feel just fine doing what I couldn't do then now.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
That's great. I love that. So for women who might be listening to this, or who are reading the article that we're writing about this, and they are hearing what you're saying, and they're wanting to step up, and they're wanting to be, more authoritative or ask for what they want, but it's not comfortable for them, not their nature, just not how they were raised. I think a lot of us, it's also, I was raised by my grandmother, who was even 2 generations older. So yeah, thankfully she was a little spicy, so she did, let me speak up a bit. But I think a lot of women just weren't really raised to speak up, or told that that was okay, and didn't have a great model of that. Maybe for whatever reason they struggle with this. How do you tell people to practice this, or how do you tell women to start? I mean, I know you mentioned starting at home, but is there a path?
Well, I think first of all, it's look at your past, and look at how you've responded in the past to get the outcomes that you have today. Because really, stuff's going to happen, whether your husband comes home in a bad mood, or your boss shows up and says no, or whatever. That's all going to happen. It's all based on how we respond to that situation. That's going to create an outcome. And so I always have women go back and say, look at every response you've had in the major situations in your life, whatever those major events were. And you could even timeline them if you want, from 0 to whatever age you are. And then go back now. And if you'd known then what you know now, at least intellectually, how could you respond differently? Could you say that would support where you want to be in your future? And then play that out. So I use them as like, every obstacle actually has an opportunity. So what does that look like? So I have them kind of go back and look at that. But then I also ask them, what do you want? And then everybody looks at me like I have three heads because they're like, what? I get to ask myself what I want. And then I hear the logical what I want, what I think I can have. I'm like, no, no, no. What do you really want? If the sky was the limit, what would it look like? And then I have them really think about that for a while. And then we look at, all right, if you were going to get that, how would you go from what you're saying? Like, what would that minimum thing be that you'd have to do? But also, what are all the things that are going to get in the way? Or what stories are you telling yourself today that might keep you stuck? And so identify those obstacles now. And so when you come up against them, you go, oh, I recognize that conversation I've had with myself 1,000 times. I can do it differently. So kind of role playing it by yourself, role playing it with other women. A lot of women, I have a gal who's Persian in my permission granted group for the third year in a row. And she's gone through a divorce, which is not a good word in a Persian family. And, going from being in a very professional environment to more of a self-help environment, to listening to her family tell her she's crazy, to her ex-husband just, dragging her through the mud basically, but just reminding her of her greatness and being that person that's there to say, you can do this. If I did this, so can you. And that's just what's true. And so it's finding those stories, it's watching the right TED Talks, it's joining the right mastermind groups, it's you're known by the company you keep, as my mother would say. I used to hate that phrase. Most of my friends are not good people. They weren't, today, those people, I'm glad that my mom was the way she was, because I would not be in a good spot. But it's really important. So hang out with people that love you sometimes more than you love yourself, that are willing to support you. I always say, I already have an inside critic. I don't need an outside critic.
Yeah, we need cheerleaders.
Definitely. And I mean, I was talking with Seth Godin, who was one of our speakers at the Transformational Leadership Council, I don't know, about a year and a half ago. And he said, if anybody on this phone call right now thinks that we all don't have at least two voices in our head, you're wrong. He said, men have it, women have it. We all have imposter syndrome. It's just choosing the right voice to support you in your future. And so I think just knowing it logically, trying to hold that high intention of getting what you want, and trying to stay as detached as possible from the outcome, and just walking through the fire and just celebrating the fact that you did it and you survived it. I always tell people, have you ever seen guts on a wall? Like, nobody explodes when they ask for something. Nobody explodes when they go to that next level. Did somebody sweeping it under the rug? Because I've never seen anybody die over this. But, we almost feel like it's a life or death experience. And so just remember that this is just all part of the course. And if you choose you will most likely win. And it's not, I don't mean it selfishly, but I do mean it selfishly. It's like we kind of have to put ourselves first to be the best version of us, so we can be the best version for our employees, our families, our friends, whoever it might be. It's when we sacrifice those things that I think we get that resentful feeling, and then we start doing things that aren't good.
That's so true. We have to advocate for ourselves. I mean, really, we're the only ones that most of the time can do that. And I think, like, I'm sure the more you do, try that, and the more you do things, the easier it gets. The first time is always the hardest, and it gets easier the more practiced you are.
Absolutely. And again, it's just like anything else. I remember I had to do a kind of a reorg with Chicken Soup in the early days, but I was getting ready to sell it. And so we had to really cut the budget and do some things. And I spent a year role playing with my COO how it was going to happen, in what order, over and over and over again. So when I did it, I felt like I had already done it. And some of it wasn't easy. One of it was fire your sister. That was the first person.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yikes. Yeah.
I had to do it. And so I just had to walk through like every scenario, what could be said, and I just had to be able to stay in my body. So by kind of role playing, it really helped me a lot.
Yeah. You do something.
Yeah.
And you get through it. Yeah. And
I had a COO that knew more than me. So I was lucky to have a mentor that could say, no, we're not doing it that way. So it's finding other people that have been there before you, because as you know, we can easily look at any 25 or 30-year-old and say, oh, this is nothing. Like, write it down, because you'll be laughing about this in 10 years.
Yeah. I think mentorship is so important. And if you find other women, or, just people in general that are living the life that you want to have, and you, have the opportunity to ask them questions, or you just emulate some of the choices that they're making, and you surround yourself with people who are maybe just one notch above where you are in the spectrum of life. And you always punch up, right, is what they say. But like, just surrounding yourself with people who are, like you said, are positive and are supportive, and don't tell you, oh, you'll never do that, that's impossible. I mean, because it's hard when everyone around you is not even telling you that it's possible to do what you want to do.
I think it's really hard, and I've had to learn that one the hard way because I live like 5 years out into the ether, and I've always been kind of a dreamer, but more so in probably the last 15 years, and because I get bored easily, and I've had to learn who to share my vision with because I already know it's kind of like, which makes it great that I can live in ambiguity and also awful that I can live in ambiguity because some people have to know everything. And so if you are talking to the wrong people that aren't comfortable with not knowing, that's not the right person to share a new vision with because we typically, at least for me, I have an idea and I have to say it out loud and I have to talk about it and have people ask me questions so I can start to kind of mold it. And, it's kind of like making dough. I've got to figure it out, but I have to talk it out. I can't just sit there and meditate and figure it all out. It's just not the way I work. So I've had to learn to go to the right people, like different mentors that I have and things like that, that are excited for me that I have a new idea.
Yeah. And I mean, some people just don't validate your experience and what you're excited about, or it could be jealousy. There's a million reasons why people don't respond the way that you're hoping that they will, and say, yeah, go for it, you can do it. But we all need that. We need at least one person in our lives who is that person for us.
And it could be just one person.
Yeah.
You were saying earlier that your son-in-law is trying to get into the fire department. My nephew, who I raised part of the time, who got into drugs, wanted to become a firefighter. And I was thinking in my head, he's a really talented kid. He could build anything. He built my whole pool when he was high. I mean, he was really talented. But I never once said to him, there's no way you're going to get that job because you have a history. And so I said, okay, put that on your vision board, but also you might want to go to architectural school. And just kind of reinforcing. And he's almost like the next level for him is chief at the fire department that he's at. And, I never told him once he couldn't do it. I just didn't want to be that person.
No, don't pop people's balloons. Like the world will do that sometimes, but you shouldn't be the one to do that.
No, and the fact is, none of us know what anybody can do until they try.
Absolutely.
So you don't need to have. I also see a lot of women like, well, I'm going to get this one last PhD. I'm like, for what? For what? My God, that's like, you're going to spend as much money on another, even one PhD that you could invest in starting your own company and just get the right people together and create a think tank and, get friends together that all think outside the box and just start to come up with ideas and start asking different people for their feedback and create a business plan and, strategize. I mean, they're all muscles that we just have to learn how to use. And for a lot of us, we grow up being told what to do in school, being told what to do when we get out of school, being told who we think we should marry and who we should marry. I mean, it's just kind of, that's the way I grew up anyway. So my mom didn't talk out loud. I never saw a process of how she thought. And so it just, the house was dirty or it was clean. I didn't have any real reference points at that point in time in my life. So I think the more that we can just encourage women to go out there and share their story and share their why. And it's so important to know your why, because if you're not really passionate about something, if I was only into the chicken soup thing for the money, or if I was only into permission grant for the money, it never would have worked, probably because I would have given up. I was really in it. It was more of a mission. Both of them were at some level. I was so excited about the books and I was so excited to see something grow that everyone said couldn't. And, when you tell me no, I'm like, okay, bring it on. So for me, that was fuel. But I just feel like if you don't have that fire within you, it's very difficult to sustain something because you're going to have to get those no's. You're going to have to get turned down, but it's okay. You'll survive it if you really love what you're doing.
Well, and I'm sure every time you hear from a woman how much you've helped them or how you've given them, permission to give themselves permission, and all the success stories that they come back and share with you. I mean, that must be really invigorating and really kind of realign you with your purpose, because that's just like fuel for that kind of a dream,
It is if we take it in. But how often as women do we, I was reading someplace on your site and it was like one person could say one bad thing to you and 10 other people could say good things and you hold on to that one bad thing.
Mhm.
And so how often do we actually take in the feedback when somebody says, oh my gosh, you changed my life, or you saved my life, or you got me out of that marriage, or I would never be this person. We kind of go, oh yeah, great, thanks. But it's, you got to celebrate those successes too, because those are wins for you. And so I always tell people, create a vision board of what you want to give yourself permission for. And then when you get it, put it on your success board so you can remember that you did that. Like, oh, here I was right before I did this big thing. How was I feeling? I was scared to death. I was second guessing myself. I was wondering, should I just crawl back under the covers and not get up for that presentation? And then how was I feeling after? So grateful I did it and still going, I'm not sure I want to do that again for another month or so. But to be able to remind yourself, I keep these round hat boxes of letters and I have like 3 or 4 of them just full. They're giant boxes. And every now and then I'll just go back through and read some of them just to remember, why, sometimes to remember why I'm doing this.
Yeah, that's actually a great idea. I've never heard of anybody doing a success board, but that really resonates with me because I have a tendency to, like, I'm always looking for equilibrium. So once I reach a new plateau or a new level, I always just get really comfortable there. And I forget that that was my dream 6 months ago, because now I've moved on to a new dream, and I really don't let myself celebrate it as much as I should because I'm so much perpetual motion. But a success board would be really good for me. I think I need to go make one today.
They're good for your kids to make too. It's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I always remind my kids of the things that they've done. And when they're going through something hard, I say, oh my gosh, you've been through worse than this. And did great. Like, I remind them of something hard that they went through and they succeeded at it. And I'm so good at giving them pep talks, but I don't do it for myself very often. It's something I really need to work on for sure.
Well, I'm going to write a new book called Take My Advice, I'm Not Using It. So if you want to write a chapter, let me know.
That sounds like a great book. I can think of a lot of people that need that book, myself included. I give really great advice. I don't always take it. I'm a better advocate for the people in my life than I am for myself. I think probably that's a normal thing, but
I think so too. I think that's why it's important to have people around you that really want to support your vision of what you want to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was a great call. I feel like I was just chatting with a friend. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was nice to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for doing this.
Can I tell you one thing quick about Goal
Yeah,
Friends?
yeah.
So Goal Friends is kind of it was meant to be more of a community kind of thing where 6 to 12 women in a group get together, kind of like a mastermind group. And my partner kept saying, I just feel like this is more philanthropic. It's supposed to be a nonprofit. I just feel like there's a bigger vision for this. And so we have just recently gotten into prisons in Virginia. And we're literally certifying the women in prison and giving them their PhD.
That is amazing. I love that.
It's so cool. And she said, we were on the docket a couple weeks ago with complaints. And I said, oh no, what happened? She said, they want more workbooks. They want more facilitators. So, everybody needs it. And these women are creating vision boards and they're getting their PhD when maybe they haven't ever gotten a degree, period. And then they're going out and certifying other women. So it's kind of cool. Like and that took us 11 years to figure out.
Wow. That's so empowering though. I can only imagine. I mean,
Really
that's
cool.
life-changing for them. I'm a court-appointed advocate for foster kids, and I always ask for teenage girls. And it's amazing that no one has ever told them that things are possible for them or that they're capable of something. Everyone tells them, oh, you can't do that because of this, or you can't do, but being told, yeah, you can do anything. Like, just don't let people limit you. It's a paradigm shift that is life-changing for people in certain circumstances. So I can imagine how much of a difference that is making for those women.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's so cool to watch, and it feels better than anything we've ever done. And again, it took 11 years for us to figure it out. So never, ever give up.
No, because obviously that was meant to happen, because that's amazing. We're definitely going to talk about that, because I think that's an awesome program. I didn't know you were doing that. That's really cool.
It's really amazing.
All right. Well, thank you again. And hopefully we'll talk soon.